we've got a country that the poverty level is wealth in 99% of the rest of the world. And so we're talking about how woe is me, woe is us, and woe is this, and our
99% are the 1% in the rest of the world.
Even the figure's even bigger than that.
I agree.
So here we are, incredibly wealthy. Nobody really has to start. Exactly. And here it is. Money is all over the place. And the guy that's making, oh my God, he's making $35,000 a year. Why don't you try that out in India or some countries we can't even name, or something like that, China, any place. The guy is wealthy.
You hear that, America? You hear that, 46.5 million people who are living in poverty in America? Do you hear that, 47 million people whose food stamps were cut? You hear that, everyone who's being turned away from food pantries that are running out of food, as documented by our own Ned Resnikoff? Do you hear that, kids at home on a snow day who aren't eating today because you only get your regular lunches from school, and a snow day means you don't get lunch? Here's what you need to do. Just go to India. Why all the whining? All the time, whining, whining, whining. All right, the views you just heard at the top of this segment were those of Bud Conheim, the bebow-tied, befleeced, and bespectacled co-founder and CEO of Nicole Miller. Here's the thing. It seems like every day there's some headline of some rich guy saying something that reveals a bafflingly incorrect and blinkered view of the world and of the fundamental problem of inequality. It's not just Bud Conheim. Remember less than a week ago, we were treated to the oddly detailed opining of AOL CEO Tim Armstrong as he explained to his employees why he was making changes to their retirement plan, saying, quote, "We had 2 AOLers that had distressed babies that were born, that we paid $1 million each to make sure those babies were okay in general. So when we had the final decision about what benefits to cut because of the increased healthcare costs, I made the decision to basically change the 401k plan." Armstrong later apologized and reversed his proposed pension changes. But those comments seem to display, among other things, a bizarre blind spot in his empathetic faculties, to have pointed to some employees' desperately sick children on a company phone call so that everyone at the water cooler the next day would wonder, who's the one that messed up our 401k plans? And sandwiched in between these two sterling instances of humanity, we have billionaire real estate mogul Sam Zell, right out of 1% Central Casting.
The, quote, 1% are being pummeled because it's politically convenient to do so. The problem is that the world and this country should not talk about envy of the 1%. It should talk about emulating the 1%. The 1% work harder. The 1% are much bigger factors in all forms of our society.
Let me tell you something about Sam Zell. He bought the Tribune Company in 2008 for $8.2 billion, an extremely highly leveraged deal. It was widely regarded, I reported on it at the time, as an unsustainable debt structure that would implode in on itself. Well, guess what? Less than a year later, the company went bankrupt, listing $7.6 billion in assets and $13 billion in debt. More than 4,200 people lost their jobs, but despite the company's troubles, executives received tens of millions of dollars in bonuses. Sam Zell is like the action movie hero who throws the lighter behind him, not bothering to look back at the explosion. That's Sam Zell. Try doing what Sam Zell did if you are not in the 1%. So what the heck is wrong with these people? Joining me now, venture capitalist and technology entrepreneur Nick Hanauer, a member of the 1%, who's going to explain to me what the heck the deal is. What is your response when you see these are not isolated incidents? This has actually been a recurring theme, I'd say.
Unfortunately not.
No, particularly I think since the crash and Obama's election, there's a certain subsection. Obviously, I don't want to paint with a broad brush. There's tons of people who make a lot of money who have fantastic politics. There's a certain subsection who are convinced that they are under siege and are just not going to take it anymore.
Yeah, so it's a super interesting thing, and I think, as you may know, Chris, I've been out talking about economic inequality for a while, and what you learn quickly is how emotional this subject is, and that's because, you know, ultimately, this is not about money, it's about status, privileges, and power. And, you know, the current sort of trickle-down economic orthodoxy is is amazingly confirmatory of the power and status and privileges of people like Sam Zell and others, right? The idea that markets are perfectly efficient, that the rich business people are job creators, all of this is basically designed to confer power and status on these folks. And so when you begin to challenge that status by calling into question the idea that, for instance, that economic inequality is a good thing, which is what they would hold, again, you're not challenging their pocketbooks, you're challenging their manhood. And you have to remember that for a subset, look, this is my world, I know a lot of these folks, and so, for a subset of these people, the most important thing in the world is status, privilege, and power. They have sacrificed everything for it. These are the people who did not go to their kids' soccer games, right? And so
no, that's a very good point.
Right? So these are a lot of these folks. I mean, it's these are borderline sociopathic people, and they don't care about other people.
Well, I don't want to call people. I mean, I don't want to diagnose anyone from afar. Let me just stipulate.
Yeah. Okay. But good for you. But anyway, I mean, but you just have to recognize that people, look, not everybody in the top 1% is a sociopath. I don't mean to say that, but power and status and privileges are enormously important to people in general, and they're doubly important to people who have worked relentlessly for them their whole lives.
I think the point you're making there about the emotionality, I think, is so key, because there is this story that you tell yourself, in the process of success, in which you've got this sort of positive feedback loop, and a lot of these people, I'm sure Sam Zell's had many dark nights of the soul, and he's been through troubled times when it felt like the whole thing was going to fall apart, and there's this kind of feeling of, don't you understand how hard it is to get where I got?
Yes. But also, Chris, look, everybody has to be the hero of their own story.
Yep.
That's just the true of people. And so if you accept, for instance, the efficient market hypothesis, the idea that markets are perfectly efficient, then the rich deserve to be rich and the poor deserve to be poor. Look, if you believe that, when you roll up in your $150,000 Mercedes to some poor family begging for food, you don't have a moral crisis. You roll past thinking to yourself, well, that all is good in the world. But that's because you're a job creator, right? You are, as Sam Zell said, as all these guys say, you are in the part of the you are part of the population that matters, and other people don't, and therefore, everything is right with the world. But of course, for instance, if you're not a job creator, if it's the middle class that are the true job creators in a capitalist economy, then you may not deserve all the status, power, and privileges that you have.
That's right. It is this question of desert that once you start kind of getting at that, you get somewhere very deep very quickly. And Nick Hauner, I got to say, you've been doing a great job speaking about this stuff. So thanks for coming on tonight.
Thank you.
Nick Hauner, venture capitalist. Thanks a lot. All right. Much more on the pathologies of the 1%, a problem I find endlessly fascinating when we come back.